Europe must unite or die. But can it? In the face of political infighting, military shortages, and wavering public support, can Europe truly come together? And even if it does, will it be enough to stop the storm gathering over the continent? This isn't just another crisis. This is Europe's biggest test since World War II. A test of will, of strength, of survival. A test that will determine the future of the free world. Let's find out if Europe is ready. But before we answer that, we need to understand just how dire the situation really is. Because this isn't some distant threat or challenge for the future. The clock is already ticking, and make no mistake, it all comes down to Ukraine. Let's start with the situation on the ground. Ukraine is fighting with the largest military in Europe outside Russia, 800,000 soldiers under arms, holding over 930 miles of front lines. And these soldiers aren't just defending their own land, they're also engaged inside Russia. At the height of the offensive, Ukrainian forces controlled some 500 square miles of Russian territory. By Sunday, they were clinging to barely 30 miles along the Russia-Ukraine border. This all sounds impressive until you look at who Ukraine is up against. Russia's President Vladimir Putin is pushing to expand the Russian military by 180,000 troops, aiming for a staggering 1.5 million strong force. And these soldiers aren't alone. Thousands of North Korean troops have already joined the fight, backing up Russian offensives in Kursk. The cost of this fight has been nothing short of catastrophic. For Ukraine, 46,000 soldiers killed, 390,000 wounded. For Russia, a bloodbath. Estimates put Russian casualties between 600 and 750,000, a number so high it's almost impossible to comprehend. According to the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces, these gruesome numbers are even higher. Almost 900,000 casualties by mid-March 2025. And yet, Moscow keeps throwing more men, more tanks, and more artillery into the fire. That's probably why Russia managed to capture over 1,600 square miles in 2024 alone, an advance measured in bodies, not victories. And it doesn't look like Russia is running out of weapons anytime soon. North Korea and Iran are keeping Moscow stocked with drones, rockets, artillery, and as many as 8 million shells. Meanwhile, Russia's own military spending has skyrocketed, $145.9 billion in 2024, a war budget that now makes up 6.7% of its GDP. Even with catastrophic losses, Russia keeps replenishing its forces. 1,400 tanks were destroyed in 2024, but thanks to Soviet-era stockpiles and increased production, Moscow still rolled out 1,550 new or refurbished tanks, 5,700 armored vehicles, and 450 artillery pieces. On top of that, 1,800 Lancet loitering munitions, essentially long-range suicide drones, were deployed, a 435% increase since the start of the war. And here's the most alarming part: Ukraine is struggling to keep up, and that's putting it mildly. The main reason? US President Donald Trump's 180 on Russia. Everyone feared what his second presidency might mean for Ukraine, and now the worst of those fears have come true. Just days after a disastrous Oval Office meeting with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in late February 2025, Trump paused all US military assistance for a few days. Weapons en route to Ukraine stopped mid-air. Munitions waiting in Poland frozen. $3.85 billion in promised arms off the table. And it gets worse. The US also paused intelligence sharing, leaving Ukraine without the critical targeting data it needs for its long-range strikes. However, both have now been resumed. As Alexandra Ustinova, People's Deputy of Ukraine, explained, "A lot of your weapons are dependent on the intelligence that's coming from the US. Without it, F-16s, missile defenses, and precision strikes become far less effective." Ukraine was standing on the battlefield half-blind and underarmed. Russia was, of course, ecstatic. The Kremlin had been waiting 3 years for Ukraine's backers to falter, and now Washington just handed it exactly what it wanted. Putin's war isn't over, but his patience is paying off. Trump, meanwhile, is making his priorities crystal clear. He wants a rapid peace on Russia's terms. He has berated Zelensky, pushed for negotiations, and even started talks with the Kremlin without Europe or Ukraine at the table. Bart de Wever, Belgium's prime minister, summed it up best. "Mr. Trump, he is full of surprises. They are mostly bad surprises for us." But wait a second, if Trump is pushing for peace, why does Europe need to unite then? Won't this all just end? Unfortunately, that's highly unlikely, because the harsh reality is that Putin isn't serious about peace. He never has been, and he never will be. According to US and allied intelligence, Russia's goal hasn't changed. It's still total control of Ukraine. One Western intelligence official put it bluntly, We have zero intelligence that Putin is interested in a real peace deal right now. The Kremlin still wants to dominate Ukraine, carve out more territory, and make sure Kyiv never joins NATO. And Putin, he thinks he's winning. He believes he can simply wait out Ukraine and Europe until they break. The battlefield losses aren't fazing him. If anything, Trump's momentary aid freeze has given him every reason to keep going. And let's be clear, he will keep going. The Kremlin's ambitions don't stop at the borders of those 233,100 square miles that make up, or made up, Ukraine. No, Putin has long had his sights set on restoring Russian influence over the entire region. If he's allowed to succeed in Ukraine, the rest of Europe is next. The Baltics, Moldova, even Poland. They could all become the next targets in Putin's imperial expansion. It's a chilling reality that Europe is only now beginning to grasp. The question is it too late? You see, Europe was warned long before this war began. In fact, former US President Barack Obama was one of the first to make it clear back in 2014 that Europe must take responsibility for its own defense. The message was simple. The response was not. European leaders paid lip service to the idea of greater self-sufficiency in defense, but the commitment just wasn't there. The continent was content to rely on the US, assuming that NATO's security guarantees would always hold. Well, we are witnessing the fallout of that assumption now. Yes, European countries have supplied a significant portion of military aid. Approximately 25% of the equipment in Ukraine comes from European nations. But that's not enough. The European Union has also imposed numerous sanctions against Russia, recently extending those targeting over 2,400 Russian individuals and entities. But let's be honest, the economic consequences of these sanctions are being felt just as much in Europe, with inflation soaring and public discontent mounting. European citizens are growing impatient, and their leaders are facing tough decisions. This is why Europe must now take full responsibility for its defense. And the only way to do that is by uniting. It's not just about sending more weapons or imposing more sanctions. It's about reshaping Europe's approach to its security from the ground up. Now, this all sounds well and good, inspirational even. But in reality, the road to Europe's unity is far from straightforward. It's more like a winding path full of detours, roadblocks, and a few too many potholes. Here's what we're talking about. The first roadblock standing in Europe's way is political divisions. At the moment, these boil down to how the continent perceives the threat posed by Russia. Take Germany as an example. This country has been walking a delicate tightrope since the invasion of Ukraine. On paper, Germany is the single largest donor of military aid from Europe, with $13.71 billion allocated by December 31, 2024. But in reality, the country has been repeatedly criticized for dragging its feet, particularly by Eastern European nations, which see Russia's aggression as an immediate and existential threat. For countries like Poland, Estonia, and Latvia, Putin's forces aren't some distant concern, they're right across the border. However, Germany is now taking a decisive step to counter these criticisms. In March 2025, the German parliament approved a historic €500 billion spending package aimed at strengthening the country's defense capabilities and infrastructure in direct response to Russian aggression. This move marks a significant shift in Germany's traditionally cautious military policy, reflecting the growing pressure from allies to step up. That's why Poland, which shares a border with Russia's heavily militarized Kaliningrad region, sees the stakes a little bit differently from Germany. While Berlin debates its role in European security, Warsaw has wasted no time in ramping up its own military, determined to ensure it's prepared for any scenario. Poland's been all in since day one, opening its borders to over 1 million Ukrainian refugees and offering military and humanitarian support. This European country has also been loud and clear in its calls for more military support for Ukraine, actively seeking US involvement and advocating for NATO to take a more aggressive posture. Polish leaders have even pushed for the stationing of US nuclear weapons on Polish soil, a sobering reminder of the pressing threat from the Kremlin. But Poland hasn't solely been relying on the US to protect its territory. The country has also become NATO's biggest spender by GDP share, with a mind-blowing 4.12% in 2024. In 2025, that percentage is expected to rise to 4.7%, close to the 5% Trump asked European NATO allies to achieve. Interestingly, even the US isn't close to this percentage, spending 3.4% of its GDP on defense in 2024, and Germany's defense spending in 2024, a joke. This economic powerhouse barely met NATO's 2% guideline because, of course, it's easy to hesitate when you don't share a border with Russia. But trying to wake up entitled countries isn't the only battle Poland is fighting in Europe. It's also part of the Visegrad 4 countries, with Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. These countries were all once behind the Iron Curtain, so you'd think they'd have a unified sense of urgency about the Russian threat. But surprise, surprise, there's more division here than you'd expect. Poland and the Czech Republic are rock solid in their stance against Russian aggression, willing to send arms and ammo to Ukraine and openly condemning Russia. But Hungary and Slovakia, they're a different story. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has been especially vocal in his admiration for Putin, playing a dangerous game of diplomacy that many see as an attempt to remain in Russia's good graces. Orbán vetoed an EU-wide push to replace US military aid for Ukraine and has even opposed EU sanctions on Russia. Slovakia, too, under its populist leader Robert Fico, has been hesitant to fully back Ukraine. Fico, who has parroted Kremlin narratives, including the bizarre claim that Ukraine's government is run by Nazis, has opposed supplying arms to Ukraine, instead calling for an EU peace plan. This political divide is more than just a few bad apples. It's a serious fragmentation of Europe's unified stance. While Poland and the Czech Republic and many other European countries understand what's at stake, Hungary and Slovakia seem to think that appeasing Russia is a safer bet. This is where Europe hits its first pothole in the road to unity. When countries can't even agree on what counts as a threat, their collective response falls apart. The second major roadblock to Europe's unity in defense is economic tensions. While Europe has shown a lot of political goodwill toward Ukraine, there's a huge gap between that goodwill and the financial and industrial capacity to back it up. Wealthier EU states like Germany and France are more equipped to contribute, but it's not always enough. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states, which are directly threatened by Russia, are pouring a lot more of their resources into defense. Meanwhile, southern European countries like Spain and Italy are lagging behind, leading to frustration and a sense of unfair burden sharing. This financial imbalance becomes even more critical when you look at military limitations. The US has provided systems like Patriot air defense batteries, HIMARS, and advanced artillery, things that Europe simply can't match in terms of both quantity and quality. The defense industries in Europe are struggling to keep up with the demand for weapons, especially for critical systems like guided weapons, tanks, and aircraft. While Europe can produce some of what Ukraine needs, much of the specialized equipment, especially long-range defense systems, is still reliant on the US. However, with the US intermittently suspending military aid to Ukraine, Europe must act swiftly to bolster Kyiv's defenses and prevent any jeopardy to Ukraine's ability to protect itself. But is everyone in Europe aware of this urgency? And more importantly, do they care? You see, another major roadblock in Europe's unity over Ukraine is the European people. Recent polling data suggests that public support for Ukraine in European countries is waning. In Germany, a January 2023 Forsa poll found that over 80% of respondents prioritized ending the war through negotiations rather than focusing on Ukraine's victory, suggesting limited enthusiasm for continued military support. By April 2024, public opinion remained divided, with 42% supporting increased military aid, while 22% wanted to reduce it, reflecting ongoing debate over Germany's role in the conflict. Similarly, in Italy, a May 2023 poll showed that 50% of respondents supported continued financial and military aid to Ukraine until it reclaimed all its territory, including Crimea, while 31% wanted support to end. When including those who backed aid until Ukraine at least regained land lost after the 2022 invasion, total support rose to 69%, indicating stronger backing under certain conditions. Even in the Netherlands, where backing for Ukraine has been relatively strong, a 2023 poll revealed that 20% of respondents believe that their country should cease assistance. These trends suggest a slow but noticeable decline in enthusiasm for continued support across key European nations. If this is unity, we'd hate to see division. Though we don't have to look too far. Europe's military coordination paints the perfect picture of fragmentation. Right now, the continent has about 1.47 million active duty military personnel, but the effectiveness of those forces is hampered by fragmented national armies. Unlike the US, which can deploy cohesive, four-sized units with unified command and control, European forces operate under a patchwork of 29 separate armies with no centralized leadership. This lack of coordination can lead to a slower, less effective response in a crisis. For Europe to effectively defend itself and back Ukraine, it must streamline its military coordination. This isn't just a matter of unity, it's a matter of life and death. But military coordination is only one piece of the puzzle if Europe is to truly unite. Let's break down the rest. It all begins with bold leadership, not just for the European armies, but for the entirety of Europe. The continent needs someone to step up, someone who can unite Europe and guide it through these perilous times. French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer are the names that come to mind based on their recent commitment to reinforcing Europe's strategic autonomy. But whoever manages to rise to the occasion may find themselves filling the void of Western leadership, a role once firmly held by the US, but now left uncertain in the wake of Trump's unpredictability. It's a heavy mantle to bear, but one that Europe and the world desperately needs. The second piece of the puzzle is peace through strength. Europe must find a way to surpass its divisions and keep the military aid flowing to Ukraine. Given that the total aid that has come from Europe since February 2022 rivals that coming from a single country, the US, it's clear that only a unified Europe can truly fund its defense. And this can't happen without significant investments from everyone involved. To effectively defend Ukraine and itself, Europe needs to rethink its defense budget dramatically. Right now, defense spending stands at about 2% of GDP for most European countries, but that's not enough. Europe needs a substantial boost in spending to ensure it can defend its borders and maintain military strength against growing threats like Russia. An initial assessment from Bruegel, a European think tank, suggests an increase of about $272 billion annually, raising spending to roughly 3.5% of GDP. This increase would allow for joint procurement and national military upgrades, and it would have to be supported both at the EU level and through national contributions. The good news is that Europe is actively exploring every possible avenue to consolidate and expand its defense budget, with several key proposals already under consideration. One of the most ambitious is the European Commission's $163 billion loan program, championed by Ursula von der Leyen, which aims to fund critical military systems such as anti-missile and air defense, drones, and cybersecurity technologies. This plan would allow the EU to raise capital through markets and allocate funds to member states based on demand, promoting joint procurement of high-cost defense assets. In addition, discussions are underway to relax stringent EU fiscal rules, introducing an escape clause that would enable countries to increase defense spending by 1.5% of GDP without facing penalties. If approved, this measure could unlock an estimated $707 billion over 4 years. Now that's what you call a war chest. Another controversial but potentially significant funding source is the roughly $200 billion in frozen Russian assets held in European banks, particularly in Belgium. Some EU nations, such as Estonia and Poland, support seizing these assets to finance Ukraine's defense efforts or broader European military initiatives. However, major players like Germany and France remain hesitant, citing legal and economic concerns. If a consensus is reached, this could provide a massive financial boost to European defense efforts. And there it is again, consensus, the ever-elusive unicorn of European politics. With all these measures combined, Europe could be on the brink of a big bang moment in defense spending, potentially surpassing $1 trillion in new military investment. With a budget like that, Europe could mobilize, modernize, and ramp up production all in one go, building a unified defense powerhouse like never before. However, this isn't a simple switch. None of this can happen overnight. Take production as an example. The CEO of Rheinmetall, Germany's largest defense contractor, puts it bluntly, "We've got nothing in the depots." These words highlight a critical gap in Europe's defense capabilities. While the US can rapidly draw from its vast military stockpiles and replenish them due to its robust defense industrial base, Europe is not in the same position. As a result, European countries face a huge challenge when it comes to supplying necessary weapons and equipment, especially as the war in Ukraine continues to demand resources on an unprecedented scale. As it stands, Ukraine's ammunition stockpiles could run out by the summer of 2025, leaving it completely vulnerable. But the speed of production is the real bottleneck here. As Mark Kansian, a retired Marine Corps colonel, puts it, "Any country that puts in an order today, you know they won't get the first one for at least 2 years. It might be another year after that for the last one to arrive, and that might even be a touch optimistic. So how can Europe fix this? The answer lies in unity. Europe's fragmented defense industry needs to come together, pool resources, and standardize procurement to drive down costs and ramp up production. Instead of each country making separate, smaller orders, a unified European effort would bring down unit costs and ensure that orders are filled faster. For example, German company Helsing recently secured a production order for 6,000 long-range drones for Ukraine, just one example of how joint procurement can meet urgent demand and help bridge the gap between European capacity and battlefield needs. The EU has already been making moves in this direction, investing $330 million to support common procurement and leading to over $12 billion in contracts for systems like air and missile defense, armored vehicles, and artillery ammo. This kind of unity must expand to mobilization too. According to Ben Wallace, former UK Defense Secretary, Putin doesn't actually have much of an army now. This gives Europe a window to act swiftly while Russia scrambles to rebuild. Though it's not like the European leaders can wave their wands and create the estimated 300,000 battle-ready troops needed to effectively deter Russia from further aggression. But they must start somewhere, possibly following Poland's example as the country gears up to build a 500,000-strong army. This trend needs to spread all throughout Europe. The reality is that no single European nation can fully build and modernize its forces on its own at the necessary speed. But as a united front, European countries can achieve far more. The continent needs to come together, pooling resources, training, and expertise to rapidly mobilize forces and infrastructure. By organizing joint training missions, sharing intelligence, and investing in mutual defense capabilities, European nations can create a more cohesive and formidable military force. It's time to stop talking and start doing. And this is precisely what needs to happen for Europe to truly unite. Less talk, more action. As Wallace warns, Putin knows us. He looks at our words and no action and just thinks we're all hot air. So when all is said and done, can Europe truly unite to save Ukraine? Well, there's no doubt that Europe has the potential, the resources, and the leadership to make a real impact. But the challenge lies in speed and scale. The best-case scenario, where Europe acts swiftly, coordinates military support, and solidifies a united defense stance, would undoubtedly help Ukraine. However, the real question is whether Europe can move fast enough to make that difference, given that Russia is actively regrouping. In the end, Europe's unity might not be enough to push Russia back just yet, but it can certainly keep Ukraine in the fight. But will this be enough? And are European leaders truly ready to put their money where their mouth is? Or will hesitation continue to hold them back? Also, how do you see European countries surpassing obstacles like political divisions and public support? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Now go and check out Russia Panicked, Europe's super missile just took down its first jet, or click this other video instead.